Well, look, thanks for coming on. I appreciate it. I think I wanted to start this series and talk about uh, AI and industry in general. And the best way I thought was obviously to start with finance and fintech because
Hmm.
that's what I know best, or it's all I know today.
You know that and like video games and lifting, like that makes three
Correct.
things.
Well, this isn't going to be Joe Rogan. Yeah, video games is my form of martial arts, and I don't think rugby is a very interesting topic.
No, but AI,
Unfortunately.
everybody wants to talk about. So if you've got some like pretty chart with AI agents,
Hmm.
then you are social gold, my friend. That's what people want. People want Ben Affleck having opinions about AI. That's what the people came to see.
I aspire to have like Ben Affleck's level of just like wearing emotions on my face all the time
Mm.
and creating memes. Um, I want to like go back in into ancient history, and like the first time we actually met was on the 11FS podcast 102, which was episode 2 in
Yeah, episode 2 of the FinTech Insider podcast.
yeah.
Like you were like number 2, and the first one we recorded as like a dial-in, so the sound on that is absolutely atrocious. So it was the first proper podcast, and I think it was the one where we found the energy of the show, where it really
It was
started to
fun.
feel like an actual. All right, yeah, this could be fun.
Yeah.
Like you can enjoy these things. How about that?
Yeah.
Yeah. And who knew people would want to talk about finance and Pokemon in the same conversation? Because it
It
was around the
was.
time Pokemon Go had come out. And I remember asking you the question, what is Pokemon to you? And you just answered me deadpan.
Yeah.
Pokemon is everything. And and I was like, wow, okay, yeah. That was the thing. That was when augmented reality was about to happen, which,
Exactly.
it's still about to happen. Maybe 2026, not 2016.
Well, yeah, it was 2016, and I was listening to it last night, and I was giggling because first of all, it was the Bitcoin halving, Bud. The title was Bitcoin halving, Bud, and Pokemon Go, and yeah, it was very funny, and I compared it to um David Breer. He was like, he said that maybe he was the generation in front, and he
Hmm.
was like, "Oh, I'm in my mid 30s. I'm the old dude in the room," and I'm like, now recording this, I'm the mid 30s guy.
Hmm.
So we're like 9 years on. Um, but yeah, I mean, it's um, it's an interesting time in AI. I mean, I've been kind of obsessed with AI in fintech before it existed, I guess, and tried to make it happen and kind of struggled with that. Um, but I'm like really keen to hear your thoughts. I mean, as much research as I've tried to do into what's happening in the space, I always end up going back to fintech brain food. So, my show notes for this are basically like knowledge links from you.
Hey, how about that? I'm
Yeah,
glad I could be of service.
yeah, absolutely. So I guess like a bit about your background then for people that don't know. You started your career at TSIS, is that right?
No, man, I started my career at British Telecom, age
Right.
16.
Nice.
Software engineer for sort of 4 or 5 years, taking code from a mainframe and making it appear on the .com, which is a really handy skill if you ever get into financial services, knowing how mainframes work
Yeah.
and being able to get them on websites, etc. But then in 2009, so nearly 9 years on, I joined TSIS. But I
Right.
left school at 16,
Yeah, yeah,
so
yeah. Okay, that
that's
makes
how
sense
I'm
from a
not
timeline.
106.
I was
Yeah.
like, how old is this dude? I thought we were the same age. But that makes sense.
No, man, I'm 40, so yeah, you can probably do the math there.
We're
It
all
was
I'm coming up to it now. And then it was you when I met you 2016, you were the blockchain guy.
yes. Which before that I was the fintech guy, then I was the
Yeah.
blockchain guy, then I was the fintech guy, then I was the blockchain guy, and now I'm the fintech guy. Although I'm changing back into the blockchain guy. Who knows?
Really?
Yeah, it's
As it
coming
reaches
around.
100K, you
Yeah,
become the blockchain as Bitcoin is 100K, it's a blockchain guy again.
yeah. So worked in payments for a few years at TSYS, then at Barclays. But then at Barclays helped do a lot of their like fintech outreach through Barclays Rise and all that sort of stuff. Then I was head of crypto R&D over there.
Yeah.
So then when we went to do 11FS, it's like, am I the crypto guy? Am I the venture guy? Like, I'm a little bit of all of those things. I don't like to pick. I'm a butterfly. And
Beautiful
and then
butterfly.
yeah, do all of those things. And now I don't know what I am. I'm working at Sardine. I'm trying to help stop fraud over here. So, but there's some AI involved, so maybe I'm that too. Every fintech influencer will become an AI influencer or something like that.
Well, I think that like the fraud space is probably like the OG when it comes to AI and financial services.
Yeah, it's where the pain is.
Yeah.
And it's where you immediately need technology, and it's where the consequences are. Like, the obvious consequence of fraud is that there's money missing from the bank account that should be there. Like, that's going to get your attention pretty quickly. And then the obvious consequence of messing up anti-money laundering is a giant fine from regulators, and that has a habit of concentrating minds. So this is an area where you can't just throw people at it. The issue is too big, so you got to use technology. And yeah, it's been heavily used for quite some time. Machine learning in fraud. I mean, I remember talking about it in 2012, 13, and that was before, even before then, data analysis and business insights and all of those sorts of things. I mean, really applying data with way more than spreadsheets. Banks have been doing since the 80s, really.
And do you think then we're now reaching a time where there is going to be the crossover of blockchain technologies and AI, like, bringing these two things together? Is that something that you think about in the fraud space, or do you think there's some other use cases there?
I think that's not wrong. There's a fundamental problem with AI of like, it just exacerbates our what is true. We have no ground truth, kind of issue, right? Like, one of the obvious solutions to that is government issued identities and governments that can sign transactions digitally. But the issue is always like, well, what about the person? Who's the human behind the screen? I can't trust what's coming through the camera anymore, and I can't really trust the device necessarily. Like, it becomes incredibly difficult to know what to trust. And this is one area where having this perfect record of transactions, this audit trail that happens to use like PKI cryptography to move transactions forward in the full view and transparency of the rest of the world, becomes quite handy. One of the first users of blockchains was actually the government of Estonia. So they've been using a blockchain going way back, I think, since long before the first crypto bubble. I think 2014, 15, they went live with their e-residency program. But they essentially, the threat model they designed their entire government for was this government and this country has to continue to function even if we are invaded and all of our land mass is entirely occupied. So we need something that is extremely robust and survivable. And the solution they came up with was a blockchain. And that, at the time, seems like a wild idea. But now the world is going, hang on a minute. How do I know if this is really the actor? How do I know the actor's really getting paid? How do I know that my intellectual property is going to be protected? How am I going to get paid for my intellectual property? How am I going to get paid for the AI artwork that I generated? How are AI agents going to pay each other? And you try and do that with cards and that sort of stuff, and it all gets very complex pretty quickly. So there is an argument to be made for it.
Yeah, I'm quite obsessed with this idea that AI agents speaking to each other are like the way that the internet will run from like a service provider to an individual thing, and then like maybe the outcome of that is that like we're using our like applications and our websites that we use to like service our fundamental needs, like banking, travel, whatever it is. We actually interact with that less, right? Maybe I'm not talking about kind of like scrolling through TikTok. I'm like, the things that actually we spend time doing, we don't really need to spend time doing them anymore because our agents are like running around doing the work for us. A little bit like, yeah, I mean, like how businesses may run in the future. The idea that we have to sell like proactively, like companies like mine we have to go out and sell to people. Whereas reality is, if you have a need in a business, your sort of agentic model knows that and goes out and finds and speaks to other agents. Like we have an agent that's, rather than a website, we just have an agent that people hook into, you know.
Were you seeing these like clusters of agents becoming a reality? I mean, Amazon just announced at reInvent, I think about 10, 12 different agents that can work together for refactoring code from mainframes and turning it into a modern stack. And, you know, you've got the agent that builds documentation on the old code. You've got the agent that tests that documentation. You've got the agent that then tries to actually do the engineering and the developing. Another one builds a series of system tests and function tests and integration tests and an entire plan. And so all of these little agents are doing like a little tiny piece of the task, and they're all talking to each other. And it's kind of like, if you remember the early days of microservices, you'd have a microservice that would just sit there and run and do its thing, and it was as discrete and as small as possible. Now you've done that to the labor component. Like each job role is now discrete and small, and the agent isn't doing too much, but you've got all of these checks and balances because some other agent is checking the thing. A use case I was given for how that could look is, let's say you're a law firm and you need to translate some document. You could have an agent that then goes and takes that document, goes and looks for a document, translation service, and that document translation service understands legal text pretty well. So it has the ability, it goes and hires another agent that can translate Spanish to English. And then it then also has its lawyer read the English, make sure it's English law and it's correct. And then it passes it back to the law firm and goes, here you go, translated, done. Like these little agents working together, even though those two agents might not even know each other.
Yeah.
So how do they discover each other? How do they pay each other? How did they know that it was the right agent and not some malicious actor and some fraudster? When you start going down the use case rabbit hole, it gets pretty fascinating pretty quickly.
Yeah, you probably want a ledger of the activities that they've done that's kind of immutable, right? So that's maybe the crossover point. Yeah, I mean, I think the law use case is like, for me, was like the one that I was the most obsessed with when I started to really understand the power of LLMs, given that, my co-founders always said that like the whole sort of reason why lawyers exist is because they've written a language that only they can interpret. And they speak their own language, and then therefore they can only disseminate that information, and therefore like lawyers get paid an absorbent amount of money. And a friend of mine wanted to retrain to become a lawyer, and I was like, this was a couple of years ago, and I said, well, hold on, like this may just cease to exist. And then they came up with this theory of like, well, we still need to have some sort of agency over these models. We're just going to become more optimized. And I guess that's similar in a lot of financial services roles. My biggest question on financial services is like, it's, in my opinion, banking, insurance, these core service providers, like surely they should be the most data-driven businesses in the world, right? This has always been my thing. And, in a world of agents that are leveraging data and performing tasks, like, does that mean that, that this industry will be the most disrupted by AI?
Yeah, I think it does, because if you think, the whole industry really runs on spreadsheets and paper and emails, right? Like there's a mainframe somewhere. Yeah, there's a mainframe in the background somewhere, but it's mostly spreadsheets, emails, and CSVs and kind of PDFs and all of that kind of good stuff. So if you had a technology that could work with that, and then take that thing from that one spreadsheet and put it in some random other system and then move it down. It looks like the old RPA stuff, the UiPath, the blue, whatever they were called.
Yeah.
But like times 100. Because the problem with a lot of those RPA things was, they can do something so long as the process is repeatable. But most processes in banking aren't actually that repeatable. They're a bit, well, it sort of depends, what's the price today and is it really risky and do they have one of those? And then it comes down to judgment. And whenever there's human judgment involved, that's when you need something that mimics human judgment pretty well and that kind of understands it. So I think it's an area that could be massively disrupted. Like you could build the entire back office of a bank with potentially way less staff. You'd still want, I think, because you're regulated, quite a bit of humans in the loop that understand what the heck's going on. But you could meaningfully change that that staff augmentation. And there's a lot of folks looking for that cost reduction. But on the other side, there's also a lot of problems that you're just not dealing with. You're not opening new accounts because the volume of accounts that the headcount you've got can open is limited. You're not dealing with, you're not adding new accounts because the amount of compliance and alerting and transaction monitoring stuff that would come out of the back of it, you'd have to hire 10 more people in compliance. Well, what if you could do more business with the people you've got? So, yeah, disrupted maybe is the wrong word, but certainly transformed.
Yeah, rebuilt,
unquestionably.
Maybe. I kind of wrote this sort of investment thesis of exactly what you're talking about just, on a flight once a couple of months ago. Was like, and then the question from me, from a business model perspective, was like, and this is almost going back to 2016 days again, which is it better to build the bank that's from scratch, that's entirely run by sort of agentic models, a cluster of agentic models? Or is it better to take legacy businesses, they've already got customers, so they don't have to struggle to acquire customers and pay all that, and then just take function by function? I guess it's a capital question, a time question. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Will the incumbent get innovation before the innovator gets distribution?
Has anyone ever asked that question before?
There's some sort of dilemma. I'm not sure what it was called, that book, but so you can pros cons it for everybody. The company making the most money out of generative AI right now is Accenture. Mm-hmm. Because every Fortune 500, Fortune 5000 company in the world is doing a blizzard of POCs because they feel like they should.
I heard that Accenture has hundreds of banking POCs. Hundreds.
Yeah. And they will all go nowhere. And then what happens?
You said it, not me.
Yeah, but then what happens when they go nowhere?
Yeah.
I think, and what happens to Accenture when they go nowhere? Mm-hmm. What happens to all of those big outsourcers when something eventually starts to happen a different way? What I am seeing is there are a few exceptions to that rule. So JP Morgan started quietly shipping stuff. Morgan Stanley has shipped yes, it's a sort of it's branded as a co-pilot, but it's really this pull up everything I know about my customers and pull up everything we know about this bit of this market as a company for its wealth managers. That's a real product and it's in their hands and it's working and it's using LLMs because it's figuring out a contextually relevant set of data to pull based on the facts and circumstances it's given. So there are really cool things that are in production. And then your second category is actually your 10, 15-year-old companies, maybe even 5 to 15 years old companies. They've got a relatively modern tech stack. And in this category, I'd put Stripe and Klarna and those guys, Ramp, all of those guys that have a meaningful amount of customers, a meaningful amount of revenue, but have an engineering culture and can just go execute. Klarna has won the PR war when it comes to generative AI. Oh, we're just doing the work of 700 agents with AI, but the reason they've won the PR war is because they put in the work. You know this, right? 95% of the work in generative AI is boring, ugly data governance stuff. Yeah. It's is the data clean? Is it well labeled? And the answer to those two questions, getting that to yes, can take you months of sweat and tears and
Yeah, where
agony.
is the data? Does it exist? Do
Yes.
we have a central repository of our data? Is that accessible by different people? Have we built this in a way in which now, oh, actually, the departments that want to use this aren't allowed to access it, and the way we've built it, no one ever can access the data, which is, uh, I'm referring to some banking projects that we came across in the UK a couple of years
Well,
ago.
and that is incredibly common, which is why the POCs will fail. And so that is not the case for your Klarnas, your Stripes, your those sorts of guys. So I think also, who are the AI companies actually going to become customers of? So Stripe, I think, announced that something like 82% of the tracked AI companies by Andreessen were Stripe clients.
Wow.
So when there's a new market, who's winning in that new market?
Mm-hmm.
And so there's this sweet spot of like platforms that are really where AI is a tailwind, not a headwind, where it
Mm-hmm.
doesn't disrupt them, it probably just supercharges them. And then there's, so, and they can add AI to their product, but really AI just makes them better at what they already did. And then there's the third category, which is the use case company. So, my goodness, you've probably seen Harvey, you've probably seen Rogo, all of those like capital markets companies.
Yeah.
There's a load of markets data. What should you be doing? Should you be changing your positions? What like that equities intelligence and that private credit intelligence, or you're going to do a private credit deal. There's a whole bunch of documents that you need to bring together and submit to 15 different places in 15 different formats. Like, just manage the data room as a service. Like, all of that schlep work suddenly gets a lot easier. And there's a company for every use case. And what works about those companies is they have all got incredible wedges. They fit this incredibly low-hanging fruit pain point that people want to buy. And when you're selling it in an agentic way, you're selling it like a job title,
Yeah.
then what you've got is software displacing labor. It's like, I don't need 10 more people to do 10 more bits of work. It's like the software's going to do that. Software is displacing labor, and I know how to buy labor, so I'm just going to buy software instead of the labor for this specific thing. So I think all three of them could have advantages. Like, incumbents that get their act together and are willing to put in the work probably have the most to win, but most won't win. The platforms in the middle, it just becomes an incredible tailwind for them to continue to crush. And then the use case companies, the only question they have is not, are you a good use case and could you make some revenue? It's, will that use case carry you to being a great business? Or are there 15 other things that do exactly what you do, so you don't matter?
And you mentioned the sort of use case companies. Would you kind of also sort of bucket them as like the product companies? Like I'm a product owner. Let's just say I have a lending product. Traditionally those people had like a captive customer audience, because like customers can only access their services through, however they decided to service it, whether it was in person, whether it's via app, website, whatever it may be. Going forward, and like if we kind of get to this agentic world, and this is a question that like I'm not sure the banking industry really understands quite yet, is that like, if we get to an agentic world, agentic models can use the internet for you as a customer.
Yeah, so not the agent in the back office, but
Yes.
the customer's own front office. Not your front office as a business, but
Yeah.
the customer has an agent in their pocket that is running around acting on their behalf.
Yeah, and it becomes like this really sort of, this is a sort of deep question, but I actually think it's not one of those deep questions like what happens when all banking data is on the cloud? Like, what happens then? Is it completely like a crazy, scary world? It's actually something that, because I say that because not all bank data is on the cloud quite yet. Although, like, I think this is actually pushing more banks to do more cloud stuff, even though this has been kind of a 10-year super cycle. But so, like, what happens then? Because there's this sort of experience and customer disintermediation, ability to control somewhat how your customer engages with your products. Like, where does that go? Do you think that's going to be the kind of do you think that's going to be like the fintech apps, or do you think that's I kind of have a theory of like it could be the bank that moves really fast, like JP Morgan, as you said, they're doing a lot of AI stuff, and like they seem to be doing pretty well at it. They've got their own custom LLM, I think, is built off the top of OpenAI. Then you've got the fintechs, the Clios, the various different things that are kind of like sort of giving a customer experience layer. And then you've got the platforms, right? You've got the Apples and the Googles with their, let's just call it Apple Intelligence. If people start to think about a kind of intelligent layer that sits in front of, as an engagement piece that sits in front of the customer, does this like a concern that like banks, in your opinion, or fintechs have even started to think about?
Most haven't. It tends to be reserved for the chattering classes, which can be powerful signal. Or I remember when omnichannel was one of those words that was just like only thought leaders talked about. And now it's kind of like expected that you need to be able to accept payments in store and online, and it's one of the big things Adyen sells itself on. And it's like, we just kind of get what that is. This will go that way, where in about 10 years' time, it is as common as using Google is using your agent. Mm-hmm. It is your default, like everything that Google search did to advertising, agents will do to customer service and brand, because suddenly your brand doesn't matter anymore. Suddenly your customer touch point doesn't matter anymore in the digital world. The experience you're bringing them into used to be like a space to cross-sell to them. It was a space to service them. It was an opportunity to do more with them and really build around what they are and what they do. That's really moving. The center of gravity for consumer finance is moving into Apple Wallet. It's moving into Google Wallet. It's moving into that space. And if you think about it, like, imagine a use case where an AI agent, you want to go on a flight. So you say to your agent, find me a cheap flight to New York tomorrow, and sort out my transport. Mm-hmm. So it looks up taxis, it looks up flights, it's able to present you with some options, it's then able to book the flights, it's then able to complete the payment and store all of that from your email into your calendar, and you're ready to go, and the car shows up for you the next day. Beautiful. I want that. How is that happening securely? Well, it's probably happening through some sort of biometric marker on your device. So AI agents need a place to live, mm-hmm. and they're probably going to live in or around your device and in or around your wallet. They need some sort of identity credential to prove they are acting for you, and then they need to be able to authenticate and transact with that. So identity and authentication stuff where the banks might still have a right to play, but I don't know if they have a right to win. And their brand certainly gets diluted. So I think it is different to the neobanks, where the neobanks and fintech companies on the consumer side just look like a better version of what you had before, and it sort of becomes another account. This is not another account. This is another customer, and this other customer needs serving in a completely different way.
Absolutely. Yeah. I think we kind of, like, this was kind of some of the questions that kind of like were posed when we introduced open banking in the UK. Mm-hmm. Was this disintermediation of customer up to the platform? And I certainly thought there was. I just think no one really acted. No big platform acted on it in the way that, because it was so banking focused that actually the reality is the big incumbents from the tech industry were less interested, because there is, it's just high risk, less margin than what they already have today. But I think with this AI shift, like, it is necessary. I believe they all believe it is necessary for them to win at this kind of AI arms race. So then you get the hyperscalers and the consumer tech companies going after it.
I think this is where the tokenization of cards and the tokenization of accounts in the US is particularly interesting. So TANs and DPANs and all of that sort of stuff that you see. The revolution will be tokenized, and all credentials can be a token. And you're seeing it now that the US government, through Real ID, can make a PKI verifiable signature that this identity really is issued by the US government or by the state of Delaware or the state of Colorado into this Google wallet. So that's like a non-repudiation right there. You've got this proof that identity did actually come from the government. It was really issued by them, and it's sitting in that device, in that wallet. That's extreme.
Put it in the wallets now, yeah.
Yeah, so tokens become like this critical thing. Same for the card, same for the account number. Once you've got tokens that can be passed around in that way, then you can have software that can move those tokens, like agents, and you just need the human to occasionally approve a thing. This is all eminently buildable. Contrary to the point we were making earlier, I don't necessarily think it needs a blockchain. A blockchain is just a really great secure layer to put over the back of it, and it's a really great low-cost way of achieving a lot of this stuff. That will inevitably win out over a 50-year time horizon. But over 5 years, virtual cards and tokenization are absolutely the low-hanging fruit for agent-to-agent commerce or for agents doing things on your behalf. The browser company has a browser called Arc, and they're intentionally trying to remodel the internet around being agent first. And I think that's a really interesting way in of like, what is going to be the user experience for the internet? Because the internet is dead as we know it, right? Like, it's all AI slop anyway. It's all
you could
brain
just sell
rot.
some licenses to the training models for your slot.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, are they going to get access to fintech brain food for training or no?
Yeah, I mean, I've not done anything to protect it, so yeah, probably. You could probably build a better version of me pretty quickly. Yeah, it's on Substack, it's on my Beehive, it's on the .com. Yeah.
Maybe that's what I'll do going forward. Like, instead of having to get guests on, I'll just sort of go onto their Substack and then train a model to have a conversation with my model.
Dude, if you could do that, I'd be very happy to have a bunch of Simon agents doing my day job so that I could just like hang out with the kids because they're really fun.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder how you get all of this stuff done. Like, have you started to use any kind of agents in your workflow in terms of research? Because, the amount of content you put out, plus every time I see you, or every time we see each other in person, we're in a different state in the US, and you still live in the UK. So, like, how do you even find time right now?
With great difficulty. So, like, I'm scrambling, I think is the short answer. But yes, I'm using a lot of AI. Perplexity, Claude are both my homies. Like, I used to spend a lot of time researching stuff and looking stuff up. Like, that has been really compressed. And I was always somebody that could really know what I want to say, but it didn't make any sense. And it would all come out jumbled. So Claude is my editor, and it kind of gives me sort of a lot of clarity in structuring ideas and reformulating them, and also like dealing with my anxieties about the writing or hooks I've left open. So that does speed it up. But honestly, the process still takes a couple of days because a lot of it is just the original thought and the connectivity of context is still incredibly difficult to bake into these models. Like the amount of prompting you need to do to give it adequate context is still, I think, the biggest gap, and something that could build momentum around your context without building one really long chat is the most difficult thing. Once you can sort of store all of your historic chats with your agents and then have it constantly build a context model for you, that would be really, really powerful. Because so much of my frustration with AI is, no, I didn't mean that. But I didn't also specify that one thing. And now I've written like 1,000-word prompt for a 3,000-word essay. This is getting silly. So there's always that trade-off.
yeah, I was playing around with Claude on a coding project, and you can put frameworks, structures, like your keys and like various different like file formats and stuff into that as like a pre-context window to then your prompt.
Yeah.
And I guess like, yeah, there's going to be a Simon Taylor file that you drop in. And so these are all the things I want to say and don't say. But again, then probably the amount of context there that it runs out as well very quickly.
Well, and so engineering tasks is a really good one,
Mm-hmm.
in that, like, if you one shot ask it to generate code, it assumes you have the frameworks you need
Yeah.
to be able to run that code. And I'm like, oh no, wait, I just got a new Mac. I didn't even have Homebrew on it. You know, there's just basics that were missing. And I'm like, oh yeah, like I immediately knew it, but I had to teach it that's where my context was. So there might be other frameworks missing. So please specify all the frameworks that are needed for this task. Because I got really annoyed at how I just wanted to build something on my device that whenever it saw an AMP project URL, it would automatically truncate that URL and make it a clean URL and get rid of any tracking cookies or anything like that from the URL. It's just like, oh. So I ended up going down the rabbit hole with that, and when I should have been working, spent 2 hours trying to build this thing, and then ended up actually spending 2 hours doing config for the Mac, and then I'm like, oh, I've not even started to build it, and then I had a syntax error, and I'm like, oh, for God's sake.
Yeah, this is the many hats problem, and then wanting to get back into some sort of coding project, which is like this is fun, beautiful thing, and then those 4 hours have gone, and then you've not done your job.
But I think, though, there's an importance and there's a lesson in that for anybody in financial services, which is if you want to understand AI, you've got to dance with it.
Yeah, that's a quote. That's the hook for this pod. And then I guess going back to kind of financial services in the AI space, then like there's this Evident AI index which like tracks, I guess, top 50 banks on how they're implementing AI, and you've got JP Morgan Chase at the top, which I don't think really surprises anyone. And then, it's ranked off of various different scores, but, we've seen, I think with Chase, as we talked about, they kind of have their own internal configured LLM that I think it's now like 150,000 employees have access to.
Mm-hmm.
And the use cases are like writing assistance, idea generation, document summarization, those kind of things, summarization, which is, again, a lot of what we talked about before.
Which most people get out of the box with Microsoft Copilot and tend to hate.
Yes.
So, like, I guess, like, building on that, I think this is an interesting index, and there's some interesting follow-ons from it in terms of use cases. But I mean, like, if you're a banker today, maybe you're a bank in that top 50 or you're not in that top 50, how would you think about, like, what use cases do you think you were a banker, you understand the...
Oh my God, the low-hanging fruit is the operation stuff.
Yeah.
It's like, have you seen a blizzard of sanctions alerts since Russia invaded Ukraine? The answer is yes. Sanctions alerts, transaction monitoring alerts are growing exponentially. You can't hire people fast enough and you don't want to get fined. Wouldn't it be great if you had a bunch of AI agents that could pre-screen all the false positives? Why? Because the best way to get rid of false positives would probably be to buy something like Sardine and have way better transaction monitoring, but you're probably not going to rip and replace your sort of like sanctions back end and your transaction monitoring back end as a big bank. It would take too long. It would be incredibly risky. But what if you could have 10 Sardine AI agents that can review those alerts and quickly go and do a web search and go and pull together a bunch of other data sources and pre-screen them into like ones your analysts should pay attention to first and ones they should pay attention to later. And Sardine's live with that, Greenlight's live with that. There's a bunch of companies who do exactly that thing. I would start in those operational use cases and I'd just get to production. Where I've seen the most action is in capital markets. So wherever there is an edge to be gained, banks are suddenly incredibly innovative in capital markets. So, I can identify equities, investments opportunities, and I can do more private credit deals, and da 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 da. It's actually the buy side that's just cleaning house over there. So those are the two big areas. Then probably the third is customer service. Sierra has done a really good job on productizing customer service. So kind of like the Klarna model, but without building it all yourself. Those would be
A
my
little
big
birdie
three.
told me that the Klarna thing was OpenAI was like, it was like they just said OpenAI just, we'll just do whatever you want in terms of like, well,
Yes.
not, just go and let them run at it. And now you've got the other AI platforms kind of going like, we need these type of customers. We need to find these customers.
We need that case study client.
Yeah.
So I think the CEO Christoph flew out to visit Sam Altman in 2022, having played with like an early GPT-3 or something like that, and actually volunteered. Like, we will be your case study. Come at us. Like, I want our CTO with your CTO. Like, let's build together.
Awesome.
Let's be your corporation use case. And so, whilst most people have used a co-pilot inside of Teams and sort of hate Clippy 2.0, the difference between that and what Klarna has done is they did the bottom 90% of the iceberg. They did the hard work. And whilst the headlines are annoying, the hard work is probably a lot more annoying. So it's one of those annoying, I've got to stop saying that word. It's one of those frustrating things where person works hard isn't what gets the headline. Like, AI does the job of 700 people, gets the headline. But yes, there were a lot of actually people that worked really hard to get to that point.
Yeah. And I guess that's, the point around jobs, right? It's just changing what people will be doing. So, I agree on all of those points. I think the operations, customer operations, bank operations, it's like, wow. I mean, the amount of stuff you can do there is just insane, especially when you talk about what you guys are doing at Sardine and you talk about the 3 eyes process, which is kind of what you described, right? Which is like, okay, take this transaction over here and then match it to a transaction on a different system. So that's like kind of like some tech work that an agent can do. And then you got to go out and like,
check the website. Does the website so merchant risk scoring? You're onboarding a new merchant as an acquirer. Check that they have a website. Does the website look vaguely like what's matched on the business register? Does what they're purporting to sell match their NAICS code? And that all of this stupid stuff that a human was left to do because nobody could fully automate it because it was so unstructured. Suddenly it's like, yeah, it's pretty good at doing that, actually.
And you have teams of like hundreds of people doing this right now. And I've spoken to some, especially in the US, where you have this kind of the bank that sits behind the bank, the sponsor bank thing, where they're having to do all this as well across different systems. And the fact that the merchant database is just horrifically out of date and doesn't match to the correct merchant, that kind of thing.
Oh, data quality is a whole other thing. Yes, completely.
Yeah. So I guess number one use case is operations. Right, get it done. I think the capital markets folks will run at anything that gets them some alpha, right? So I think they'll do it on their own.
No, they will, and there's a lot of bottoms-up adoption going on. Weirdly, and like I said, there's an AI company that does everything you need. Every department and every job role within every department probably has some Y Combinator company that does that thing.
Yes, and I actually just saw that. Speaking of YC, they put out an ask for, again, people that are applying LLMs or AI to boring administrative tasks. And I think the person that called that out was actually Tom Bloomfield. So I think, and his use case was in the banking space that he gave an example. So I think we're all talking about the same thing there.
Yeah, it's the obvious space. It's there's so much to be done. Because I don't know about you, but I'm surrounded by bits of paper still.
Yes.
I've got countless random bits of follow up to do, and drowning in admin is a thing that we all feel, especially if you work in financial services. And there is actually some really good products out there, and once you experience them, they feel like magic. They're essential, so definitely get to it.
What I need is my little lapel badge that scans all my written documents in front of me, and as I write them, and then makes my to-do list and digitizes it. Speaking about the best AI product that's come out yet.
The Marcus Brownlee review of that was savage, but it was well deserved. It was well deserved.
Oh, look, no, absolute pleasure to. I'm returning the favor from 9 years ago, so yeah, it goes full circle.
Hey, better late than never, my friend. I didn't take it personally that you came to my house, you had a dinner, and I wasn't able to come back the other way, but we fixed it.
Yeah, we did.
Keep crushing it, man. Keep doing the bud thing.
Appreciate it. Good chatting to you, Si.